Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. The last bastion of opposition against Syria's Bashar al-Assad is being pushed to the brink by an intensifying military assault. The Syrian regime's attempt to conquer Idlib province by force has also put Turkish soldiers in harm's way. Turkish troops stationed in Idlib at a dozen observation posts have been deliberately targeted by Assad's forces. 7 Turkish soldiers and a civilian contractor were killed in one of those attacks on the 3rd of February. Turkey swiftly retaliated, and according to Defence Minister Hulusi Akar, several dozen regime soldiers were killed. And in a rare show of frustration, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan directly called on Assad's main backer, Russia, to stick to past agreements and to understand Turkey's sensitivities in Syria. He also gave a stern warning to the Syrian regime to withdraw to a previously agreed line or face the consequences.
Şu anda 12 gözlem noktamızın
If the Syrian regime will not retreat from Turkish observation posts in Idlib by the end of February, Turkey itself will be obliged to make this happen.
And to break that all down, joining me now is Vehbi Baysan, who is an assistant professor at Haldun University, and Yakzan Shishakly, who is the co-founder of the Maram Foundation for Relief and Development based in Gaziantep. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. Vehbi, President Erdogan said the latest attack amounted to a new era in Syria and said any further escalation would be responded to in kind. So what does this new era signal?
Well, actually, Turkey's position is very clear. Turkey initiated the Astana process as well as Sochi, and at the same time really supported what was going on in Switzerland. But the reason the Turkish soldiers in Idlib, based on the decisions taken in Astana and Sochi, so they're not there as occupying forces, but rather it's as they call it, de-escalation zone, and hopefully the tension would de-escalate and would pave way for peace. So what Turkey was trying to say, that we should stop bloodshed in Idlib, that the possible one, because the regime and Russian forces were determined to attack from air, land and sea and clear the whole area.
They've been breaching these agreements.
Well, that's the thing. That's why Turkey is furious, because these checkpoints are there and our soldiers are not on the combat preparation. They're just simply
observing.
Observing, and yet they were attacked, and all this young man killed brutally. I mean, it's unacceptable. So that's why Turkey is saying, we have an agreement. That's the very reason we are manning these posts. We are not there to fight, and yet getting all these attacks. So that's why, understandably, they're furious.
Yeah, the deaths of Turkish soldiers was the first time in the 9-year-old conflict.
Yeah.
Yakzan, what can we expect by the end of February, and what happens if the Assad regime continues to move further to the north?
Well, it's already the biggest man disaster made after World War II. So we've seen and we witnessed over 500,000 people just in the past 2 months moved from northern Hama, South Idlib, to the border of Turkey. If the regime move further to take Idlib city, the numbers in Idlib city is around 500,000 people to 1 million. And we're going to see more and biggest disaster, and which is, it will put too much pressure on the border and on the people who's already living in the streets and their cars and everywhere. And with this cold weather, we're going to see like even worse situation as we're seeing right now.
Does the regime see all people, let's say the Idlib of residents, for example, as terrorists?
Well, yeah. I mean, in the past 9 years, everybody did not agree with the regime is a terrorist. Every territory, whether...
So there would be no mercy on them, right?
At all. And they even make sure they cannot go back. Even the Russians try to claim they have a humanitarian corridor back to the regime area. Nobody is crossing. And every time they see 100 or 200 people are crossing, we see a crime from the regime forces against those civilians.
Vehbi, Turkey warned Russia to stay out of this process and stick to the past agreements. Has Idlib become the greatest threat to the Turkey-Russia relations after downing of a Russian jet?
Well, we very much hope that it doesn't really further escalate between Turkey and Russia, because they are cooperating in the other areas. And at least they initiated, together with Iran, of course, the Astana process, and Putin was
They're
there,
going to meet
Erdogan going.
in Tehran.
Hopefully. So there are meetings and all that. So whole idea is to give chance to peace. But however, when these agreements are breached and when our soldiers are attacked and killed, but also now look at the regime and Russian forces are pushing people from south to north and east to west. So they don't allow them to go anywhere else but towards Turkey. So that is the dangerous thing, because we're already hosting millions of Syrians here, which is fine by us as citizens. But as President Erdogan said, I mean, we can't really have another million or two in this country, especially the international community is not very helpful in that. So, and what we want to see on the ground there is the international organizations for refugees, these people in need. We don't want to see any humanitarian crisis beyond our borders. But as far as I know, maybe you know better, that actually they are nowhere to be seen to help these people.
How will this humanitarian crisis be addressed? I mean, Turkey is setting up temporary shelters, 10,000 of them. Will it solve the problem? When do you think the international community should shoulder Turkey's burden on this?
There's no way to stop the mass killing and the mass refugee IDP crisis unless you stop the war. Because you're talking, Turkey is setting some shelters, other governments are trying to pay some money. Today, Mark Lowcock mentioned $40 million from the SERF emergency from United Nations office, New York. But this will not be enough. We're talking about millions of people who've been displaced forcibly overnight with no clothes, no food, a very bad medical situation, and in winter time. So there is no way to stop this unless they stop the war.
All right. Vehbi, Russia fell short of sending its condolences to Turkey after Turkey lost 8 of its citizens. Yet the U.S. quickly moved in and expressed its heartfelt feelings and said the United States is ready to support to Turkey. Why now? What's at stake for the United States? And do you believe that the United States some way will pressure on the international community to help people in Idlib?
We very much hope that to happen. It's very unfortunate that Russia did not even extend their condolences, really. I mean, because I know there are personal relations at the highest level, and they should not have behaved that way. So far as the United States is concerned, they're a superpower, no doubt, but for some reason they don't want to too much involved in Syria, and they reduce their presence there. But we know they can play a key role in humanitarian issues. So I think they should be more involved in this. And probably they don't want to escalate the situation between Turkey and Russia and Syria in the region. But I mean, I don't know, I have this view, I'm in the view that the less the Middle Eastern Studies departments they have in their country, which many of them are shutting down because no funding, their policy in the Middle East suffers enormously.
So how can they help?
U.S., I mean, we're talking about the biggest or the most important country now in the world, where they have the power and they have the...
What are they going to do? I mean,
well,
are they going to take these people out of the region and resettle them?
They can push the Russian and pressure the Russian and the regime to stop the war. Because again, helping the people with aid is like a band-aid on the wound. You cannot do this. You need to help and pressure the Russian and stopping the war. And what's really also coming is the cross-border resolution, which is a big thing. I mean, if they stop a cross-border resolution, we're going to be even worse situation from what we're seeing right now.
Vehbi, last question to you. Wary of the developments both in the eastern and the western part of the Euphrates, President Erdogan signaled there are going to be enlarged operations in and around the secured zones. What do you make of that? Has Turkey changed its Syria policy?
But no, I think since the beginning, Turkey had a very clear stand, which is like we have 450 kilometers border with Syria, and Turkey's security forces' job is to safeguard their citizens. So, and since 2011, probably the most brutal war going on there that the modern times ever seen. Over 500 people, 1,000 people got killed, and 12 million people displaced. So Turkey wants to secure their borders. Therefore, Turkey conducted other operations like Afrin and El-Bab. Turkey don't want to, probably, in my view, go into Idlib and kind of take over and stay there. Especially that there are this propaganda and fake news that Turkey doing this to get a chunk of Syria, which is not true. I mean, if Syria guarantees the safeguard of our borders, probably Turkey wouldn't be bothered this much. However, Turkey wants to be part of also any kind of humanitarian crisis which more likely to occur with the regime forces pushing people. People already mobilized, as we heard here. Turkey also wants to help them. So very much hope that just stays in humanitarian level.
All right, gentlemen, we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
US President Donald Trump calls it the deal of the century. But for most of the world, Trump's so-called Mideast plan is nothing more than a tacit US blessing for a one-sided land grab by Israel. Global condemnation against the plan is already pouring in. From the EU to the Arab League and OIC, many are asking how viable a peace plan can be if the other side wasn't even consulted. Has President Trump deepened a crisis he promises to solve? Our correspondent Alican Ayanlar tells us more.
In 2017, the newly elected Donald Trump had been in office for less than a month when he welcomed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. From the very beginning, the U.S. president was determined to tackle one of the most complicated battles of the past century. During that meeting, Trump said, "I think we're going to make a deal. It might be a bigger and better deal than people in this room even understand. That's a possibility. So let's see what we do." 3 years later, the two leaders gathered at the White House once again to reveal the long-awaited plan that the U.S. said would resolve generations of conflict.
On Sunday, I delivered to Prime Minister Netanyahu my vision for peace, prosperity, and a brighter future for the Israelis and Palestinians. This vision for peace is fundamentally different from past proposals.
Trump envisages a future Palestinian capital in the town of Abu Dis, outside Jerusalem and beyond Israel's security barrier. He proposes underground transportation links between the Palestinian territories in the occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And south of Gaza, in the Negev Desert, two areas demarcated as industrial, agricultural, and residential zones. One element of the plan that may prove to be its only enduring aspect is the U.S. recognition of Israel's claims over the Jordan Valley and all Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. Noticeably absent from that announcement at the White House, though, were Palestinian leaders. They've pronounced Trump's proposal dead on arrival.
فإن الصفقة مرفوضة جملة وتفصيلا منذ أن أعلنوا عن ضم القدس وتوحيدها عاصمة لإسرائيل. ولكننا لازلنا نؤمن بالسلام وبثقافة السلام.
Much of the Arab world has taken a harsher tone, lashing out at the so-called deal of the century. But one of the key architects say it's a golden opportunity for Palestinians.
I think they look quite foolish today. Also, one of the great ironies is they keep saying they want to be a state. If you're a state, you don't call for days of rage when you don't get what you want. So this is a real moment for them to show the world, are you ready to become a state or not?
For some, Trump's Mideast plan is seen as a tacit approval for Israel to annex 30% of the occupied West Bank, already reduced to a fraction of its historical borders. So, the question is, will the pro-Israeli proposal bring peace and stability to the Middle East, or will it plant the seeds for decades more conflict and suffering? Alican Ayanlar, Straight Talk.
And joining me now is Chloe Benoist, who is a news editor at Middle East Eye. And joining us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank is Mustafa Barghouti, who is the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. Thanks for joining me on Straight Talk, Chloe. Mustafa, let me start with you. From what you've seen of the deal, which you call is an Israeli plan in an American envelope, what would this future Palestinian state the Trump administration talks about would actually look like?
As it does on the map. All you need is to look at the map. And you can see that it's not a state. It's not a contiguous entity. It will look like a system of apartheid, clusters of Palestine ghettos and small entities linked to each other through tunnels, bridges, and roads controlled by the Israeli army. Each of these tunnels and roads could be closed down by the army anytime they want. But the most important thing is that it reduces the size of what should become the Palestinian state from 22%, which the international agreements agree about, to less than 11%, but not a contiguous state, but clusters of apartheid.
Okay.
This system is, as I would call it, a system of ghetto style.
All right. Chloe, what's your take on the plan, and how well, in your opinion, it is well connected to the realities on the ground? I mean, what kind of an impact it would have on the Palestinian lives if it is to be executed one day?
Well, I think Dr. Barghouti put it well. This is essentially an Israeli wish list. This is what would be the ideal solution for Israel. Now, the likelihood of the plan being implemented, is very low, but also we need to keep in mind that in effect, large parts of the plan are already in place. What the Trump plan seeks to do is essentially make official the occupation, which for over 50 years has been treated as a temporary situation, and effectively just enshrine this into law and erase any Palestinian demands for justice, for land, for self-determination.
Yeah, and also protests have broken out in occupied territories. I want to get back to Mustafa. Tell us about the mood in Palestine, as well as tell us about the mood in Israel, Mustafa.
The mood in Palestine is a mood of resistance and rejection, complete rejection to this horrible plan. Palestinians understand that the plan aims at eliminating their historical facts, eliminating their connection to their historical sites, eliminating their right to Jerusalem, to the Jordan Valley, even to the Aqsa Mosque, which clearly the plan wants to divide between Muslims and Jewish people and prohibit access to the mosque. So in general, what you see is acts of resistance, which has been growing during the last few days. There were so many massive demonstrations everywhere. There were even acts of military resistance in the last 2 days. And in Israel itself, you could see that there is no much difference between Gantz and Netanyahu. They all belong to the same racist right-wing camp.
But Mustafa, you previously said we're working to bring back unity and internal divisions. How could be this possible? And you were talking about nonviolent resistance. What's next for Palestinians?
The most crucial point here is to unify all Palestinians in one unified leadership. That's what we are working on.
How are you going to do that?
Well, I think the most important first step will be a meeting that includes all Palestinian leaders from all groups, with Mr. Abbas as well, the president, and agree on a joint strategy. The joint strategy should deal with not only with political decisions, but also with the forms of resistance that we should use in bringing down this deal and in bringing down not only the occupation, but the system of apartheid all over Palestine.
Chloe, tell us about the timing of this so-called peace plan. We know that both Trump and Netanyahu are going through some troubles in their countries. I mean, is it about helping a friend in his time of need?
I mean, certainly there's a lot of things that indicate that. So on the day when the deal was unveiled, Netanyahu was actually indicted on charges of corruption. And at the time, Trump was also going through the impeachment process. And we also need to take into account there's an election happening in Israel in early March, so less than a month away.
Yes.
So certainly that's been viewed, the move has been viewed as an attempt to kind of boost Netanyahu, boost Trump and their respective countries, and possibly will possibly with a view of influencing the election results.
Netanyahu, just right after the announcement, said he'll go ahead and annex the territories. But Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, opposed to that plan. He said he should wait until the election results are announced. So tell us how Benny Gantz is different than Netanyahu.
Well, I think Benny Gantz is in a difficult position here, in which he was invited by Trump before the plan was unveiled to kind of see what is ahead of time, and I think they put him in a position where, you know, he had to somewhat agree with it. What Gantz has said is that he is for a solution such as this one, as long as it's agreed upon with the international community, which we know won't happen. One interesting aspect of what's been happening vis-a-vis the discussions of annexation is that actually Kushner's demands that Netanyahu wait until he annexes parts of the West Bank until after the election has actually been seen pretty poorly by settlers. So this plan that gives the far right in Israel pretty much everything they want is actually now being criticized because the U.S. is asking them to wait a month until they start moving forward.
Okay, Mustafa, tell us at this point how important it is for the Palestinians to have East Jerusalem as their capital and with a U.S. embassy sitting on it.
It's very crucial, of course. No Palestinian leader could ever accept giving up Jerusalem. I mean, of course, the international community speaks about the right of Palestinians to have a state of their own and a capital in East Jerusalem. So why would we give up Jerusalem, which has always been the part of the Palestinian territory, which has always been the capital of Palestinian people?
But now the plan gives you the town of Abu Dis, which is outside Jerusalem and beyond Israel's security barrier.
But that is not Jerusalem, precisely. Jerusalem is the old city. Jerusalem is the place where you have Aqsa Mosque, where you have the Church of the Holy Sepulchral Church, the most important Palestinian Islamic and Christian sites. You cannot exchange the real historical Jerusalem with a site somewhere outside. That is nothing a joke. But in addition to that, let me say that I want to comment on the issue of Gantz. I don't think there is any serious difference between Gantz and Netanyahu. They both want to annex and consolidate the annexation of Jerusalem. They both want to annex the Jordan Valley. They both don't allow a Palestinian real state and substitute it with clusters of apartheid. So there isn't really much difference. But many Israeli intellectuals, I would say 50% of the Israeli articles are saying that this plan is dangerous also. I think there is a growing understanding that apartheid is not a sustainable system, that apartheid eventually will isolate Israel as it did to the South African region at one point.
Okay, Chloe, Turkey was swift on calling this plan dead on arrival and said Jerusalem is Turkey's red line. Also, the European Union condemned this decision, but could the international community come up with a solution, at least this time?
Well, definitely. While places like Turkey or the European Union have condemned the plan, in effect, what Palestinians need at this point is far more than, you know, a strongly worded letter. So at this point, I think we've seen that the U.S. has lost all credibility in terms of being a peace broker. So it's time for other states to step in and either push for a solution that respects international law, human rights, and the...
Are you hopeful they're going to step in?
Not really. I would like to, but I'm not quite, frankly, I'm not quite sure Palestine is high on the agenda for a lot of these countries. But it is definitely something that they should look into. Obviously, the situation's gone on for quite some time, and Europe especially has seemingly abdicated kind of any role in terms of pushing forward a solution at this time.
All right. Mustafa, last question to you. Do you think the time has come for Palestinians to think of a new generation of leadership?
Totally, yes. We need new leadership. We need new strategy. We need to give up this whole illusion of peace based on Oslo Agreement, which was nothing but a trap that Palestinians fell in. We need a whole new approach that relies on peoples, on resistance, and our main goal should not be negotiations now. It should be changing the balance of power between us and Israel. And we need to give a place for the younger generation, which represents the majority of the Palestinian people. But also, I think we need to adopt a whole plan to bring down apartheid, not in the West Bank and Gaza only, but in the whole of Palestine. The Israelis must understand that we will never, ever accept to be slaves of a system of apartheid.
All right. Mustafa, thank you for joining us from Ramallah. And Chloe, thanks for being with me on the set. Appreciate it a lot. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Aisha Subarkar. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.